Hello, welcome everyone. I hope you are all doing well. First of all, I would like to thank our speaker Torul and everyone who joined us today. During our event, you will be all muted and you will be able to post your questions and comments by using Q&A section. I'll try my best to address your questions to our speaker as much as our time allows us, of course. Please let me introduce myself and our speaker later. My name is Neslihan Yakal, and I am the Secretary General of TEİD, Ethics and Reputation Society. I would like to give a very brief and quick information about our society because I saw the registration list, and in the registration list I saw many unfamiliar names. So I would like to talk about a bit about our society. For further information, you can always reach me and our team via email. And also my colleagues will be sharing our contact information via Q&A section during our webinar anyway. TEİD is a non-profit and non-governmental organization founded in 2010, and we aim business ethics to be the keystone of the written culture of companies who are operating in Turkey. And our vision is to create a cultural change in Turkish private sector. So we act as a point of reference for companies. We support them to create awareness, to implement the principles of business ethics. We create a platform for networking as well to support them keeping their ethics and compliance programs up to date. We are running mainly three parallel plans, all feeding from and supporting each other. The first one is creating awareness on corruption effects and developing tools to fight against corruption in private sector especially. The second is creating a holistic approach on the field of ethics and compliance to leveling the playing field. Our main purpose here is enabling companies to engage proactively by collective action initiatives. As stated, we have 150 corporate members, which are representing 15% of Turkey's GDP, and they are employing more than 250,000 people. So all of our corporate members are also signees of TEİD Declaration of Integrity. So this creates a significant cross-sectoral collective action initiative for Turkey, we believe. And last but not least, we are working with youth, even at the age of high school. We aim to create awareness on ethics, business ethics, transparency, sustainability, so that we reach the next generation and impact the future of playing field of Turkish business world. We are running working groups to work together with our stakeholders. We are managing an academy where we run 42 hours corporate ethics and compliance management certification program and many other modular and tailor-made trainings as well. We publish a quarterly magazine, guides. Currently we have 15 guides. We create or try to translate in Turkish reference books on business ethics, compliance, sustainability, or transparency related topics. We own a blog, a YouTube channel where we share our webinars and X summits as well. And today's webinar will be on available for you to watch later as well on our YouTube channel. And so TEİD is constantly trying to keep itself and its stakeholders up to date. And today, as many of us, regardless of the country, organization names, or any other boundaries, still trying to overcome COVID-19 pandemic and its challenging effects, still, today we will talk about managing ethics and compliance risks in a post-COVID-19 world. And now I introduce you our today's speaker, Torul Ahmedov. And Torul is an experienced ethics and compliance professional with more than 15 years in experience in oil and gas industry, especially. He is regional ethics and compliance manager of BP, who is responsible for Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. So I need to stop here and hand over the screen to Torul. Torul, please, stage is yours.
Thank you, Leslie. Hello to everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join our webinar today. As introduced by Nesli Hanım, my name is Tokrul Ahmedov. I'm BP's Regional Ethics and Compliance Manager. My background is legal. Several years ago, I converted into a compliance professional and never regretted that decision. Today, we're going to talk about the COVID-19, how it affects our lives, our works, our society, the world that we live in, how the new normal is going to look like, and what ethics and compliance risks we could be exposed to in the post-COVID-19 world. So let me share my screen with you. I think before we talk about ethics risks or compliance risks, we probably need to talk about what will the world look like following the pandemic. Obviously, it's not going to be the same. According to some of the surveys, more than 60% of people in the world believe that life, world, society are not going to be the same following the pandemic. And we are still fighting with the pandemic. We're still in the middle of the crisis. We're firefighting at the moment. But it is time for us to try and reflect about what the new normal is going to look like, what will it mean for us to return back to normal, and how we can protect ourselves from ethics and compliance risks and challenges that we could otherwise be exposed to. There is a very interesting writing by Harvard Business Review, which is called "That Discomfort You Are Feeling is Grief." It is available online. I would encourage everyone to read it if you're interested in. What the authors suggest is that the feeling that most of us have in our hearts, in our souls at the moment, is grief. And once you can name it, you can try and overcome it. How to deal with grief? There are 5 different stages of overcoming grief. The first one is denial. And if you think of the COVID-19, then the denial stage suggests that I don't believe in the virus. This has all to do with Bill Gates and 5G technology. This will never affect me. This is just away from me. This is far away somewhere in other countries, nothing to do with me or my family. The second stage is anger, anger and annoyance. Annoyance about the lockdown, anger about restrictions imposed by the government. The third stage that comes in is bargaining. This is when we start to bargain with ourselves, saying, okay, so I'm going to be under the lockdown for the next 2 weeks. I won't be able to go out. I won't be able to see my friends. But that's going to be it. That will end the virus. And then those 2 weeks pass and nothing happens. And then comes the sadness about inability to overcome the issue, the sadness about inability to overcome the situation. And then the final 5th stage is acceptance. Once we accept that the world is not going to be the same with the virus, and we will have to live with the virus to a certain extent, then we can have some peace in our minds, because we've been through denial, we've been through anger, bargaining, sadness, and now we accept the new normal. We accept the new world. What can we do about it? Are there any techniques that can help us? Well, the first one is find the balance. And the balance is we need to try and think of ourselves, our well-being, our relatives, our friends, and hopefully you and your families are okay, you and your families are safe, and that's what we need to focus on at the moment. The second one is you have to let go of what you cannot control. You can control whether or not you're wearing a mask, for instance, but you cannot control whether or not your neighbor is doing so. So what you need to do is you need to watch your social distance and let it go. Compassion, we need to think of stocking up our compassion. In addition to stocking up masks and other medical necessities, we need to stock up our compassion. And we need to relax and be patient and just wait for the situation to be resolved. Psychology of change. Psychologists suggest that a human being often experiences the following emotions and needs, which are resulted from a change. Attachment, who am I connected to? People want to feel connected, bonded, and secure. Territory, where do I belong? Feel a sense of belonging, place, home, a team. Identity, what is my role? People want to feel important, people want to feel involved and valued. Future, people want to have some certainty about what the future is going to be. Meaning, knowing the direction, knowing what we're doing, why we're doing that, and control, experiencing control over the situation. Those emotions and those feelings can really be impacted by change. And when I mean change from the old normal to the new normal. And then we will talk about what that change looks like for us. For most of us, and for many people in the world, the new normal means working from home. And working from home has its own challenges. I was watching a video today which suggested that if a year ago, 1 in 50 Americans was working from home, at the moment, 1 of every 3 Americans is working from home. And this is a significant change. This changes people's understanding about the need of offices. This changes people's understanding of getting together into a geographical location to work. And this changes people's understanding about the necessity of working specific hours during the day, during the week, or during a month, versus delivering a work product, delivering the result. You probably have heard about this famous story about a video conference where the boss accidentally transformed herself into a potato during the video conference and then couldn't switch it off. And the video conference went on and on and on. And this could happen to any of us. Working from home, video conferencing, they have their own nuances, they have their own challenges, and hopefully you don't see me as a potato at the moment. Many people would also remember the famous interview with a professor during BBC News whose children entered the room during a live interview. And that story was very, very popular. So when we think about working from home and ethics and compliance risks associated with working from home, what do we need to be mindful about? What comes to my mind is, first of all, respect and inclusion. We need to be respectful towards each other. We need to respect the circumstances of each other. A very common thing that could happen to any of us, including myself today, is noise caused by one's children during the call. There might be personal or family circumstances that we're not aware of. There could be circumstances that people are sensitive about. So we need to be a little bit patient, and we need to be respectful towards circumstances of others. Age, in addition to sort of non-discriminatory comments, and us compliance professionals always encouraging people to be respectful towards any age, I think this has become further risks given the pandemic, because in many countries there are additional restrictions imposed on people depending on their age. So what we have to be mindful about is when working with colleagues or communicating with them, we need to be very, very careful and sensitive about joking or commenting about one's age, which may sound very discriminative and humiliating. Nationality or citizenship. Different countries have been applying different measures, and different countries have had different exposure levels to risks of COVID, and they have different number of affected people. Making any comments about one's nationality or citizenship is not acceptable. This could be sounding very bullying, discriminative, and humiliating. You probably have seen a couple of videos which are being shared on social media where in some of the Western countries, people of Asian ethnicity have been exposed to criticism or aggression, and that's not something that we can accept or allow to happen. Some experts also suggest that the pandemic may cause gender inequality. And when we say that, we primarily think about women who could be exposed to greater risk of redundancy than men. What makes people say that is that in most of the countries, and the experts that I've been listening to were primarily US or UK experts, they suggested that in those countries, women occupy most of the face-to-face jobs. So jobs like somebody who sells tickets or somebody who is at a cashier machine, at a cashier desk, those jobs are at risk of being cut off. So eventually, experts suggest that following the pandemic, there would be more unemployed women than men. And that will result in significant gender inequality in terms of employment. So that's something we need to be aware of. And secondly, experts suggest that women are more likely to be distracted while working from home because of family circumstances, because of personal circumstances. And again, this may result in gender inequality. And then last but not least, and this is something that worries me a lot, is the new normal, which is working from home, working remotely. It could have a significant negative impact on the corporate culture. Now, historically, for years and years, companies and organizations and institutions have been trying to build corporate culture through the office environment. And without the office environment, it would really be difficult for companies and organizations to unite their employees under one corporate culture. Some of the researchers are suggesting that especially this is going to be a problem for young generation, because in an office environment, young generation come into an office and they network and they build connections, and those connections help them broaden their experience, help them broaden their connections in the future, and they can actually build their future career on those connections. But without the office environment, it would really, really be difficult for people to network. Some suggest that without an office environment, without people being geographically in the same place and brainstorming together, creativity could be impacted. So individual contributors can, of course, continue to deliver their day-to-day responsibilities. People can be connected to each other digitally. People can be on MS Teams or using other platforms, but without actually being together in one place and thinking together, it is really, really difficult for those who need to be creative to be creative. And then, as a compliance professional, I'm very concerned that the new normal could impact the speak up culture. So what do we mean by speak up culture? Is people being vocal about something that is wrong, something that is unethical, something that is non-compliant, goes against companies' corporate values and behaviors, goes against human rights, goes against the law. Imagine in the old normal, in an office environment or in an industrial site environment, people noticing something that is unsafe. For example, if somebody is walking in an industrial site and they see a tripping hazard, they would immediately report that because they think that, oh, this tripping hazard could result in somebody being injured. For years and years, we compliance professionals have been trying to build the same culture in relation to ethical dilemmas, where if people spot an ethical issue, if people spot an injustice or something that is just wrong, they would immediately think that somebody could be damaged, somebody could be injured emotionally because of this, so I need to raise this. With COVID-19, our priorities have shifted, and many people that I've been talking to suggested that in the new world, in the world of crisis management, and maybe in the post-COVID-19 world, people would be more concerned about their families, their loved ones, their well-being, their job security, and just what's happening in the world with COVID-19, rather than think of speaking up, rather than think of ethical issues. And I think this means we professionals, compliance professionals, need to focus more, and we need to encourage our people to not forget about the importance of speaking up. Because an ethical issue remains to be an ethical issue with COVID-19 or without COVID-19. If there is non-compliance, which can result in consequences for the individual or the corporation, that non-compliance is not released because it does not disappear because of COVID-19. And that's something we need to bear in mind. Now, we talked about respect and inclusion, and I have a favorite story that I tell when it comes to inclusion, just to describe how easy it is to make a mistake when you're trying to be inclusive, but you're not. The picture you see on your screen is a picture of Barbie dolls, and most of you are probably aware and you have seen or purchased Barbie dolls in your lives. Barbie dolls are manufactured by a US-based company, Mattel. And for years and years, Mattel were criticized by authorities in the US for making Barbies look very ideal. And Barbies have, for years and years, looked in a very special way, not diverse. They did not reflect the reality of people being different. And then recently, in 2019, February 2019, Mattel announced that their new line is going to include a Barbie doll that is on a wheelchair and a Barbie doll that has a prosthetic leg. This is their attempt to make Barbie dolls inclusive and diverse. But this is actually Mattel's second attempt to introduce diversity and inclusion into their products. The first one was more than 20 years ago. In 1997, Mattel introduced the very first Barbie doll on a wheelchair. They announced the sales and they sold around 6,000 dolls within 2 weeks because families were very keen and very excited about buying the Barbie doll on a wheelchair and introducing that to their children in order to teach their children about people being different and all people being equal in the world. However, following the first 2 weeks of sales, the sales of the Barbie dolls, the wheelchair Barbie dolls stopped. And when I tell this story during webcasts or webinars or stand-up meetings to my audience, when I have a chance, I always pause and ask the question, could anyone guess what the real reason for stopping the sales? Why did the sales drop? And people have different ideas. Some people suggest that there are only a limited number of families who have children with disabilities and only those would be interested to buy those dolls. Some people suggest that parents do not want to sort of expose their children to negative emotions, and that's why they don't buy the doll in a wheelchair. The real reason is when Mattel designed the Barbie doll on a wheelchair, they didn't change the design of the Barbie dollhouse. And Barbie doll on the wheelchair didn't fit into the Barbie house. It couldn't go through the door and it didn't fit into the rooms. So not children who were playing with Barbie dolls, they didn't want the Barbie doll in a wheelchair because they couldn't put it into the house. And that's a classic example when individuals or corporations think of inclusion and try to do something, but they don't think about inclusion till the very end. They don't think of all of the aspects of inclusion. Another example that I often bring is an inclusion video that was recently published by Apple, where they talk about the company's strategy and the company's vision about diversity and inclusion. And that video has very powerful messages, but when the video was published, it didn't have any subtitles. So people who would have hearing problems, they wouldn't be able to understand what the messages were. But this was spotted a couple of weeks after, and subtitles were added to the video. This equally could happen to us when we are working remotely, when we're working from home, when line managers are communicating with their employees, when employees are communicating with their colleagues. It is very easy to exclude someone. It is very difficult, but very important to make sure that everyone is included and everyone feels included. I recently myself participated in a session which was called a listening session. And this listening session had around 45 participants, and it was designed for 45 minutes. The objective of the session was to make sure that if people want to share their ideas or give feedback to the management, this is the opportunity to do so. But the management didn't consider that 45 minutes may not be enough for 45 people. Another nuance that they didn't think of is that imagine you are in a physical conference room with 45 people presented in the room, and you are giving the floor to them. You can spot people who are silent. You can watch their face impressions, you can watch their body language, and you can tell if somebody is not willing to talk, or if somebody is too shy, or if somebody is just not courageous enough to speak. And then you try and push that person to speak. You try and make that person comfortable to speak. But in an MS Teams call, even if you have your cameras on, technically you will not be able to watch the face expressions or body language of everyone who is on the call. So this requires an extra effort to make sure that even the most silent voice in the room or the most silent voice on the call shares his or her ideas, his or her perspective. This is about inclusion. This is about making sure that we listen to everyone, because otherwise we may miss something that is very important. When we speak of respect and inclusion, I always share this triangle, and those who are familiar with oil and gas industry may have seen the small triangle on the left, which is incidents, near misses, unsafe acts and behaviors. On the bottom of the pyramid, we have unsafe acts and behavior. So little things which could expose people to safety risks. If you don't correct those, then they can grow to near misses. And a near miss is an incident where someone could have been injured but didn't because of luck or any other circumstances. Then if you don't do anything about near misses, if you don't do root cause analysis or lessons learned, near misses could grow into incidents. And incidents means people injured or property damaged. If you try and project that analogy to ethics and compliance, at the bottom of the pyramid, we have daily acts of exclusion. If you don't deal with daily acts of exclusion, those could grow into incidents or grievances or employer-industrial relations issues, concerns to confidential helplines, missed opportunities, etc. If you don't deal with those, then those could grow into something more serious. Those could grow into corporate investigations. Those could grow into legal cases. And my message today is, while we're working from home, while we are transforming into the new normal, let us pay even more attention to the daily acts of exclusion. Let's make sure that we communicate with each other. Let's make sure that we stay connected. Let's make sure that we don't exclude anyone willingly or unwillingly, so that those acts of exclusion do not grow into something bigger and do not result in risks or consequences for us or for companies. The next slide I have and wanted to share is this is the Golden Cycle by Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek is one of the psychology gurus that I personally follow. And Simon Sinek says that in the Golden Circle, in the middle you have why, then you have how and what. And he suggests that most of us can say what they're doing. Many of us can say how they're doing what they're doing. But not all of us can say why we're doing that. And when communicating with each other, in particular when communicating with each other in the new normal of working from home, working remotely, it is very important for us to try and understand why the person at the other end of the MS Teams call, at the other end of the camera cord, is saying what he or she is saying. So we need to try and focus not on what and how, but try to understand the why. And that's about communicating effectively. That's about listening to each other. Now, those who are football fans would probably understand what I have on the screen. And I myself am a Real Madrid fan, and this was a very miserable night for Real Madrid fans when we lost 5-0 to Barcelona. Now, the question that comes to your mind is what this has to do with ethics and compliance. Well, let me tell you another story. When I was at school, we used to have teams, and we would split into teams and play football with each other. And the team that I was in would constantly lose. And we had our sports coach who tried to encourage us all the time. And the sports coach would try and say, why do we care about this? So you played well as a team. It doesn't matter you won or lost. And there was one guy in our team who raised his hand and said, Coach, if it doesn't matter who wins and loses, why do we keep score? And human beings, they are tempted to keep score. Human beings are tempted to keeping score, which could be money for someone, success for somebody else, authority, power, it doesn't matter. And I think in a post-COVID-19 world, that at a time when we've been through a very difficult time, at a time where we've been through many challenges and many risks, it is very important that we forget about scores and we focus on what is important for us. On the subject of effective communication, Mark Twain once said, if we were supposed to talk more than we listen, we would have 2 tongues and 1 ear. And that's all about the importance of listening. Now, when we are in an office environment, when we can sit face to face and have a conversation, we speak of techniques of active and effective listening. In a post-COVID-19 world, when we're all working remotely, when we're all working from home, this issue has a new meaning. So listening to each other digitally can be even more difficult than listening to each other in a face-to-face conversation. And that's the message I want to deliver today, that we need to listen to each other, try to understand our issues, try to understand our feelings, our challenges, and what we're facing. Research suggests that people spend 70% of their time communicating versus 30% not communicating. Out of that 70%, people spend 45% listening, 9% writing, 16% reading, and 30% speaking. Now, these numbers are, of course, relevant for a prior COVID-19 world. In a post-COVID-19 world, this becomes very, very different. And that's what we need to keep in mind, that we are going to live in a different world. We are going to live in a different working and socializing environment. So we need to be very, very careful with how we communicate, how we're listening to each other, and are we understanding each other well or not. When we speak of ethics and compliance risks that we could be exposed to in a post-COVID-19 world, what also comes to mind are fraud risks that we could be exposed to. Probably every compliance professional has a favorite fraudster. My favorite fraudster is the guy you see on the screen. This is a Hollywood movie, Catch Me If You Can, with Leo DiCaprio. Some may think this is an image from the movie. Actually, it's not. This image is Leo DiCaprio speaking to the person whom he is impersonating in the movie. So this is the real person about whom the movie Catch Me If You Can was filmed. Now, speaking of fraud, what fraud risks could individuals and organizations be exposed to in a post-COVID-19 world? The first category of risk that comes to my mind is pandemic-related reimbursables. Some employers, some companies have allowed their employees to make certain expenditures which were reimbursable. So approvers of those expenses need to be careful and need to make sure that expenditure was pre-authorized, that the purchase is justified given the job responsibilities of the person, and that there is a valid receipt attached to the expense claim. Examples of those would be companies allowing their employees to purchase, for example, office ergonomics equipment or certain IT equipment in order to allow them to continue the job from their homes or wherever they are remotely located because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So for instance, if I'm an approver of a business expense, what I would check is that the equipment that is purchased is actually commensurate and related to the job of the person is doing. For instance, if somebody's job can be done remotely, then if somebody's job is basically responding to emails, that person doesn't need a printer. Or in other circumstances, if somebody's job is not related to an office environment and that person is purchasing a laptop, then that could be a risk. The second category of fraud risk is third-party invoices. Any company, most of companies have suppliers or agents working for them. And in post-COVID-19 world, the types of red flags that approvers or companies need to be aware of are, for instance, lump sum amounts with no description, agent fees, COVID-19 related compensation claims, or reimbursement of donations. What do we mean by lump sum amounts? Companies could be receiving invoices from their suppliers, from their contractors, subcontractors, asking them to reimburse an amount of money without any description. Now, what lies behind that amount of money is, of course, a question that a compliance professional must necessarily raise. Agent fees. I have personally heard cases where suppliers and contractors have suggested to their customers that because of the pandemic, because of borders being closed, they are going to hire agents who will help move the goods through the borders. Now, if the borders are closed, then legitimately a shipment cannot be moved. Or if the border closure still allows for shipments to go from one country to another, then the agency fees should not necessarily be higher. So if somebody sees any request for increased agency fees or unexplained agent fees, you need, as a compliance professionals, you need to investigate and understand what is really behind those agent fees, because easily there could be bribery or facilitation payments involved. And these are the risks that you want to protect your companies from. COVID-19 related compensation claims. I would encourage procurement departments and people dealing with invoices and contracts to always refer those to your lawyers, to your legal departments for further investigation. A COVID-19 related compensation claim has to be dealt with in line with the terms and conditions of your contract. I have personally seen claims from contractors for standby time, non-operational time, non-productive time, or compensation in relation to accommodation of contractor personnel in the country, or contractor personnel being unable to leave the country. So you really, really need to look into the terms and conditions of the contract, and you need to involve your lawyers in order to understand what does the contract say about standby, what does the contract say about force majeure, or dealing with a crisis, or dealing with an emergency situation. And that way you can protect your company from any unnecessary expenditures, unnecessary financial damage, or actually legal claims or legal proceedings. Reimbursement of donations. There have been funds established. I know World Health Organization has a fund. Governments have established different funds for donations to help the governments, help the nations fight with COVID-19 and the pandemic. However, again, reimbursement of donations is something that companies and organizations need to consider on an individual basis. Each company can decide whether or not to make a donation, but if your contractor, if your agent, your subcontractor, your supplier is asking you to reimburse the donation that they've made to a fund, to an organization, to a government, then that's a red flag. And that's where, again, you need to speak to your compliance professionals, you need to speak to your lawyers to try and understand what is really behind that donation for reimbursement. And the last category of fraud related to COVID-19 are internet-based fraud and phishing emails. There have been many phishing emails flying around regarding COVID-19 pandemic, requesting individuals and organizations to make donations. I have personally seen 3 different emails with 3 different bank accounts claiming they are related to World Health Organization. So what you should do in those circumstances, the guidance we can give is that you should only trust the official resources and websites. For instance, World Health Organization have their own website and they have details listed on the website. You shouldn't be trusting anything other than the official websites. When you look at the websites, how you can spot a bogus website. A bogus website would often be consisting of one page only. The pop-ups would normally be asking for your personal data, personal information, and you will be immediately asked to make a payment to somewhere, and that somewhere cannot be traced, that somewhere cannot be tracked. So my guidance, my message today is, if you receive a request for donation, a request for making a contribution, always make sure that you check that this. So internet-based fraud and phishing emails, you need to be very, very careful, because this could be exposing companies and individuals to fraud schemes. This could be exposing companies and individuals to money laundering and bribery risks as well. I think that's all I wanted to cover today as part of my presentation. So let me stop sharing my screen and we can take some questions.
Thank you. So far as I see, there are no questions. So we can wait a bit if there will be some questions coming. Or if you would like to add something in the meantime.
Yeah. Yes, John. While we're waiting for questions, what I wanted to add is that one other proactive measure that you could think of in post-COVID-19 world is communicating with your third parties and communicating with those working on your behalf. Those who are familiar with the UK Bribery Act and with FCPA in the US, or with anti-corruption, anti-money laundering legislation in your home jurisdictions, your home countries, many of those, or most of those, would require companies to be very active in terms of proactively managing compliance risks. So given that we are in the middle of a pandemic, given that the economy and the business are stalled at the moment, this could be an opportunity for companies and organizations to actually reach out to your suppliers, your contractors, your subcontractors, your agents, and reinforce your corporate values, reinforce your expectations in terms of ethics and compliance, and give them an opportunity to reflect. For instance, in BP, we have issued a couple of newsletters to our suppliers, reinforcing the importance of adhering to BP's Code of Business Conduct, reinforcing the importance of complying with BP's requirements and expectations in terms of ethics and compliance. And we suggested to our contractors that, given the current environment, this could be a good time for them to spend some time reflecting on where they are in terms of meeting those requirements and whether or not they need any help from us to do that.
Actually, can I ask a question? In the meantime, I'm also checking.
Sure.
Yeah, there is a question, but in between, because lately also third-party risk management, ethics and compliance risk management are on the top of our priorities as well as a society. And thank you for this example of actually communicating with the third parties. Do you have any other new, post-COVID or current new policy or procedure for your third parties? Or do you plan any trainings for post-COVID world?
We haven't designed any new training. What we have forward with is new ways of delivering the training. So just in line with the entire world, we're moving from physical trainings, face-to-face training, to digital trainings. And one novelty that we have introduced in the region is conducting supplier ABC audits. We have moved from physical audits with field work to digital audits. And this is the first time in our experience where we would go to a supplier digitally and conduct an ABC audit of their ethics and compliance program. And this is just to be in line with the COVID-19 reality, the pandemic reality.
Thank you. Now I see, okay, let's go to the first question from Alberto Coppo. Hi, Torul. How have business leaders managed uncertainty during the last 3 months? And how have they communicated with employees to help them through this period?
Thank you, Alberto, for the question. It is very important for business leaders to stay connected to their employees. I think the best that a leader can do in the pandemic environment is to make sure that they check in with their employees, to basically ask a question of how are you feeling and do you need anything, do you need any help? It is also very important for business leaders to keep employees informed. So in BP, for instance, most of the leaders have set up weekly check-ins with their teams, weekly virtual digital stand-up meetings, sharing business contacts with employees, sharing what has been happening within the company, within the industry, what's happening with pandemic and the response to the pandemic. And that helps, because imagine in the old normal, in an office environment, people chat to each other, people bump into each other at coffee areas or over lunch, and they share contacts with each other. But In the new normal of working from home and the new normal of lockdown and isolation, it is very difficult to stay connected to the information, which is why it is very important that leaders share as much as possible of business context, what's happening, what's the current status, and what is going to happen. Because the first question that people have on their minds is certainty about their jobs, certainty about their future, and whether or not they have any stability. So best advice I can give for leaders is to stay connected and share as much information as possible with their employees and make sure that that information is cascaded down in the organizations.
Thank you. And now the next question is actually very favorite of mine as well. How do you think bribery and corruption risks will be impacted in post-COVID world? Can you please also add your perspective about management of investigations?
Sure. I think in post-COVID-19 world, my personal opinion is bribery and corruption risks are going to be higher than before. And primarily that is because, as I mentioned during my slides presentation, for individuals and for companies, the priorities could have shifted. Companies, organizations, individuals have been very, very busy with trying to fight the crisis, trying to overcome the crisis. And in a crisis management mode, it is a known fact that companies and organizations are more exposed to compliance risks. So examples of bribery and corruption risks in a post-COVID-19 world would be, for instance, if you need to renew your supplies, or you urgently, on an emergent basis, need to enter into a contract with a third party, and you are ready to forego your due diligence process, you are ready to bypass your due diligence procedure because it's urgent, because it's COVID-19 related, and because you have to contract that supplier. That could be exposing you to bribery and corruption risks. That is where, for instance, you need to be very, very careful and sensitive about who you contract with and knowing and understanding your risks there. In terms of investigations, again, I think COVID-19 and the new normal of working remotely introduce certain challenges to conducting corporate investigations, compliance investigations. The very first challenge that comes to mind is conducting interviews with witnesses or conducting interviews with those who are investigated is not possible in the way we used to do that in the past. So you cannot be sitting in front of the subject of the investigation, you cannot direct a lamp into his or her face, and you cannot torture that person. All you can do is have a digital connection, and all you can do is have an MS Teams call or a Skype call with the person. And that, of course, comes with certain risks and challenges. On personal experience, we've had cases where the subject of an investigation would switch off the call and suggest that there was electricity went off, or internet connection disappeared, or there was some other technical issues. And that, of course, exposes the investigation to certain risks. But the reality is, if a concern is raised, if a complaint comes in, you have to investigate, you have to address it, because otherwise, if you don't take any action, you are still exposed to risks. And you have to be creative. What we have recently introduced is, before conducting an investigation interview, we have communicated the link to the MS Teams call, but we've also asked for the person's cell phone number. And we have warned the person that if all of a sudden electricity goes off or internet connection dies, we will be calling your cell phone. And if you don't answer your cell phone, that would be a red flag. That would be a bad signal for us.
Many new details. It's challenging indeed. Okay, the next question. Considering the COVID-19 situation in the world, many professionals claim that the world will not be the same due to social, economic changes. Is it right to say that compliance and ethics also transform into something more complex?
I think so. I have recently read an article that suggested that many companies will be considering inventing or establishing the position of chief culture officer, in addition to chief compliance officers, so chief ethics and compliance officers, because I think compliance professions, compliance departments may also be tasked to try and rebuild the corporate culture. It is very easy for us compliance professionals to get a group of employees together as an audience and talk about ethics, talk about corporate values, companies' expectations in terms of bribery and corruption. But in the new normal of working remotely, working from home, this becomes really, really difficult. So we need to reconsider the focus. We may reconsider the focus and shift from compliance to ethics side and corporate culture side a little bit. The digital world. So we'll have to cope with the new normal. We'll have to consider ways of digitalizing the compliance work.
Thank you. We lost you for a couple of minutes. Can you just repeat what you said in last 2-3 minutes?
Sure. What I was suggesting is that the many companies, many organizations are considering establishing the position of a corporate chief culture officer, in addition to the position of chief compliance officer or chief ethics and compliance officer, because there is a growing need in having a focused attention on rebuilding the corporate culture. It is easy for us compliance professionals, those in ethics or compliance, to get an audience together in a room and talk about ethics, talk about companies' corporate values and companies' requirements. But in the new normal of working remotely, it is not easy to reach out to everyone and make sure that the messages have been delivered. So the compliance profession will inevitably have to change. The compliance profession will inevitably need to be digitalized, and we will need to think of more creative ways of reaching out and communicating our messages to make sure that we remain visible, make sure that we remain connected to our people.
I think we have a bit more time, so I continue with the questions because now the questions are coming. Our participants are posting their questions. Have you noticed an increase in concerns rise to your department or change in their nature during the pandemics and lockdown?
Yes, definitely. What we have noticed is that when the pandemic started, there was a decrease in the number of concerns that were raised to our department. And we could think of two primary reasons for that decrease. One is people have been thinking about their job security, people have been thinking about the well-being of their relatives and friends, themselves, and they didn't have mental capacity or opportunity to think about ethical issues and raise concerns. That would be one issue. The second reason could be people become less courageous to speak up during a pandemic because there is insecurity of jobs, because they are afraid of losing their jobs as a result of them raising a concern. And there is the third reason, which is my personal opinion, that when you are not in an office environment, when you're not interacting with each other, then you would inevitably see a decrease in certain category of concerns coming in. Those concerns which are related to behaviors or people not treating each other with respect or people not greeting each other, not smiling to each other, these types of concerns. In an environment where you don't have the office, you have less of those concerns coming in. In terms of change in the nature of concerns, in some of our locations, we have seen concerns coming in relation to COVID-19, which of course previously we didn't have. For instance, people have been complaining about colleagues coming from abroad trips and going straight to the office without self-isolating. There have been complaints about company medical providers not treating everyone equally. There have been complaints about insurance providers. In the region, we haven't had those complaints. Those have primarily been outside of the region. I think the nature of complaints in the region, they have mostly been about uncertainty about future, uncertainty about jobs, and people feeling insecure.
Yes, I agree. Okay, the next one is from Nigar Abbasova. Thanks a lot for interesting presentation. You have mentioned some changes by suppliers related to COVID. Have you received that information through a speak up channel or other communication line, or was it identified through a special check?
I think it's a combination. So some of the issues have been communicating through our confidential helpline. Some of the issues have been communicated to us by suppliers themselves, and some have been spotted as a result of our monitoring activities. My department is also responsible for supplier audits. So we do monitoring of invoices, we do monitoring of third-party expenditures under our contractors and suppliers contracts, and that's how we spot those issues. It's always a combination. There is no one source of information.
The next question, again, thank you for the presentation. It was informative and covered very new examples, especially regarding the diversity and inclusion, the Barbie dolls. I have two questions. Has your approach to internal investigation changed, for example, postponed, changed methods, procedures during this period? And how do you conduct annual compliance risk assessment whereas there is a travel restriction? Thank you.
Good questions, thank you. Our approach to investigations has definitely changed. What we have tried to do is we have tried to prioritize those concerns, those cases which could easily be investigated remotely. Some of the cases have been postponed. Some of the cases where we needed to travel or we needed to go to off-site facilities and were not able to, those have been waiting, are still waiting in the pipeline for the times when we can do that. In terms of conducting annual compliance risk assessments where there's travel restrictions, we have reconsidered the methodology. So what we do as the region is we are conducting our own risk assessment, and we will be having the group risk assessment at the time when the travel restrictions are lifted. So it would be very risky to suggest that because of COVID-19, we are not conducting our compliance risk assessment. So we are proceeding with that. However, in terms of having verification by the group or having verification by the sort of the higher authority, that has been postponed until better times.
Thank you. There are many questions, so I'm picking now randomly from May Cunningham. What can leadership do you raise awareness of the unchanged compliance risk within the various levels of their business?
I think what management can do, what leadership can do, is make sure that they cover those topics in their communications. What people could be missing is leadership can be very focused on the business context. Leadership can be very focused on what is actually being done to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. But not all the leaders would invite their compliance officers, their compliance professionals, to join their webcasts, join their communications, and give them an opportunity to speak about those risks. But I think what leadership can do or should do is make sure that ethics and compliance professionals, compliance departments are present at those communications, are present at those webcasts. If organizations have established special working groups which are dealing with the pandemic or dealing with the consequences of the pandemic, it is important to make sure that compliance professionals are attending those working groups, they are aware of what is happening, and they have a channel of communication. Because as a compliance professional, it is important for us not just to be listening, but to be able to speak as well. And in order for us to speak, we need leadership to give us that opportunity. We can try to be proactive as much as we can, trying to reach out to our organizations. But if the channel is not opened, if someone hasn't activated the MS Teams live stream, then it would be difficult for us to reach out to a bigger audience.
Yeah. Okay, then can I continue a bit more?
Sure.
I
yes.
think we have time, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. The next one. Hi, Torul. How do you see the future of internal investigations? What are the pros and cons for digital-driven interviews?
I think the future of internal investigations, there will continue to be a need in internal investigations. If a company, if an organization wants a good and strong speak-up culture, then that company and organization has to react to concerns coming in. And the only way to react is to make sure that a fair and independent investigation is launched and the concern is being looked at, and then the outcome is communicated. In the new world, in the new normal, it is of course difficult, it will be difficult to continue conducting internal investigations. But if someone suggested that we shouldn't have internal investigations in the post-COVID-19 world because we're working remotely, I would say that's the wrong decision to make. We have to try and be creative. We have to try and think of different methods, different ways of conducting those internal investigations. And pros and cons, I think I mentioned earlier that the cons of digital or remote investigations is that it is difficult to interview. It is difficult to get access to all of the information you want to access. And those who are experienced in interviewing would confirm that it is a very different feeling when you're sitting face-to-face with the subject of the investigation, and you can watch and understand the emotions, the mimics, the body language, and the reactions, as opposed to even with a camera that is switched on. It is a different feeling. So you don't get the same control over the interview process. Cons are, as I mentioned earlier, you could be in the middle of an interview and the person you're speaking to could dial off and then suggest that there is no internet or electricity went off or they had an issue. We had those cases recently. We had a case where the subject of the investigation interview hang up the phone 3 times, hang up the MS Teams call for 3 times. And we knew that during those 3 times, he was trying to reach out to a colleague to try and understand what he said. And this is the con of having a digital interview. If this was a physical interview, it would have been a back-to-back interview with people in different rooms without a chance to talk to each other. But again, when you balance experiencing difficulties versus not doing it at all, I think experiencing difficulties is a less risk rather than not investigating concerns that are coming in.
Thank you. One more question from Sabina Irzayeva. Have you experienced any claim from contractors associated with COVID situation and their ability to survive, secure their businesses? And if yes, how do you manage such situation?
Yes, I think we have received many claims from our contractors in relation to COVID-19, but as I mentioned during our presentation, those have been referred to the lawyers because any claim has to be considered on a case-by-case basis in relation with the terms and conditions of the contract. Being a big player in the region, BP has introduced certain measures to help suppliers in terms of self-isolation of their personnel, in terms of quarantine and the lockdown and the travel restrictions. But any claims of force majeure, any claims from suppliers in relation to their financial situations or their inability to perform their jobs, those need to be treated in line with the terms and conditions of contracts. And the terms and conditions of contracts can be different. So no two contracts are identical to each other. And if you don't follow the contract, then you are exposing the company to the risk of legal proceedings or legal claims. So any claims that have been coming from contractors in relation to this have been handled by the lawyers in line with the contract terms.
Okay, thank you. Let me check any other. We have many. How do you assess compliance and ethics development perspective in Azerbaijan amongst local market players?
That's a good question. Thanks for asking. For the past several years, we have seen an increased interest in compliance and ethics profession on the market. We have seen an increased interest in companies getting certified or companies actually hiring ethics and compliance professionals. If you are on LinkedIn, you will see that there are jobs advertised and there are people who put their titles, and you can see that if before it was very, very random that you would see anyone whose title is compliance officer or ethics and compliance officer or professional, now you see that.
I think what is missing in Azerbaijan is an equivalent of TEİD, to be honest. We have been discussing this with TEİD as well. We do have a professional network which exists unofficially. It's called Azerbaijan Ethics and Compliance Network. We actually have some members of the network on the call today. I've seen some questions coming from the network members, but we don't have a professional association. And perhaps in future, that would help build the profession, that would help build the standards of the profession, and make sure that there is one window, I would say, where people can go to for advice, for training, for certification, or for resources. So that's what's missing. But in terms of the development of the profession, I have seen very, very positive signs because interest in this is growing. And if 10 years ago, a local company was interested in building compliance only because they wanted to secure a contract from a multinational company, and that was a requirement of multinational company. Nowadays, I see more and more local companies who understand that by having an ethics compliance program in place, they actually become more competitive. They become more competitive commercially, they become more competitive ethically, and they can compete with other international companies on the market. So it is growing, but I think it needs a little push.
Okay, thank you. It's almost 3:10, so I think it's better that we stop here. Okay. But for our participants, if there is a specific question, please send us your question and we will try to make a bridge between our speaker. So I'm thanking you, Torul, for your time, for your sharings, and everyone who joined us today. Do you have any last words, Torul?
Thank you for the opportunity. It was great to reach out to a big audience, and it was great to share my perspective, my experience. I'm happy to stay connected. I'm happy to be on the other side of the bridge. If somebody has a question, more than happy to address it offline. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.